Chapter 7. The Compass That Doesn't Point North. The morning haze clung to Verosphere Plaza, the air thick with the artificial scent of freshly recycled air. Shops bustled, MarketLink notifications pinged softly in the distance, and the rhythm of life went on like always, predictable, controlled. And yet, there was a shop here today that hadn't been here yesterday. Gideon slowed his steps as he and Beau neared the narrow storefront. It was wedged between two larger buildings that, until now, had seemed pressed together without room for anything in between. It wasn't a slick, glass-fronted store like the rest of Verosphere. No holographic ads played, no MarketLink banners welcomed shoppers. Instead, the faded sign above the entrance was barely legible. Beau squinted. Was this always here? Gideon shook his head. No. Yet here it was, and waiting just inside, sitting behind an unremarkable wooden counter like he had been expecting them all along, was a small, well-aged man. The first thing that stood out about him was how unbothered he looked. While the rest of Verosphere moved with its usual manufactured ease, he lounged in a way that suggested he had nowhere to be and no one to answer to. A pot of tea sat beside him, steam curling lazily into the air. He looked up as Gideon and Beau stepped inside, studying them both with mild amusement, like they had arrived late to a meeting they didn't know they had. Then, with a small grin, he said, "You're late." Beau glanced at Gideon. "You know this guy?" Gideon exhaled. "No." He waved a hand. No, he doesn't. Not yet, anyway. But let's see, does the name Harrowmere mean anything to you?" That wasn't the question Gideon had expected. "I'm sorry, no," Gideon said. Beau raised a skeptical brow. "Me either, cryptic tea guy, so may I ask what exactly we are late for?" The man leaned forward slightly. "A gift." Gideon stiffened. "A what?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached beneath the counter and pulled out something small, rolling it between his fingers before holding it out. A compass. Old, smooth, metal glinting dully in the soft light. He placed it in Gideon's palm with the same care one might use to hand over a spare coin or a set of keys. Like it wasn't important, like it wasn't anything at all. It was a compass, but the needle wasn't pointing north. In fact, it wasn't pointing anywhere. It wobbled slightly, then went still, as if it had no direction at all. Gideon frowned. "It's broken," the man smirked. "Or maybe you just haven't gone the right way yet." Beau chuckled. "Oh, great, it's one of those things where the meaning's all deep and mysterious." He turned to Gideon. "You sure you don't know this guy?" Gideon exhaled, closing his fingers around the compass. "Why are you giving me this? Is your name Harrowmere?" The man tilted his head slightly, eyes warm with something unreadable. Then, with a knowing grin, he said, "Yes, please take this. You'll need it." The compass felt heavier in Gideon's pocket than it should have. It wasn't that it was physically heavy. If anything, it was too light for how much weight his mind was putting on it. Something about the way Harrowmere had handed it to him, the knowing smile, the way he had expected Gideon to take it, it all felt like the start of something. And Gideon wasn't sure he wanted to start anything. He turned toward the door, still feeling the cool metal of the compass pressing against his palm. Beau was already halfway there when Harrowmere's voice cut through the moment. "One last thing, Gideon." Gideon turned back, his brow furrowing slightly. Harrowmere's eyes were steady, but there was an amused tilt to his mouth, like he was enjoying this a little too much. "Don't follow it just yet." Gideon frowned. "Why Harrowmere?" Harrowmere lifted his cup of tea, exhaling through his nose like the question itself was predictable. "Because the first place it points to won't be the real answer. Just a test." A flicker of annoyance passed through Gideon's chest. He didn't like riddles. Beau huffed, running a hand through his hair. "See, this is why I hate riddles." Gideon exhaled, his fingers tightening slightly around the compass. "And how do I know when it's the real thing?" Harrowmere gave a small, knowing smile and took a sip of his tea. "You'll know." Of course, that was the answer. Gideon shook his head, turning back toward the door. "You're worse than the market representatives. You know that?" Harrowmere chuckled. "I've been called worse things than that." Beau opened the door, stepping out first, muttering something under his breath. Gideon hesitated for only a second longer, then followed. The shop door shut behind them. And for the first time in a long while, Gideon didn't feel like the ground beneath him was solid anymore. Gideon wasn't sure why he turned back to look at the shop. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way his stomach twisted, like he'd left something behind. Maybe it was just the feeling that Harrowmere was still watching him, amused by how little he understood. But when he did, when he glanced over his shoulder at the shop, it was gone. The space between the two buildings was sealed shut, as if it had never been there at all. The storefront, the faded sign, the wooden counter where Harrowmere had been sitting, it had all vanished. The alley was closed off, pressed together, seamless. Gideon came to an abrupt stop. Beau walked another few steps before noticing. What? Gideon's voice was tight. The shop. It's gone. Beau frowned, then followed his gaze. He froze. Okay, nope, that's not... He rubbed his face. That's not possible. They both stood there, staring at the space where Harrowmere's shop had been. Gideon knew Verosphere changed. Stores moved, layouts shifted, businesses got replaced. But this was different. Normally, when a shop was replaced, something else took its place. This was nothing. It was as if there had never been anything there at all. Beau let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Yeah. Okay, I hate this. Gideon barely heard him. His fingers curled around the compass in his pocket, the weight of it suddenly much heavier. The shop was gone, but Harrowmere had given him something, and that meant this wasn't over. Gideon and Beau walked forward in silence. The further they walked, the more normal Verosphere felt again, like nothing had happened. Like they hadn't just stepped inside a shop, talked to a man who acted like he had been expecting them, and walked away just in time for the entire place to vanish without a trace. Gideon kept his hand in his pocket, thumb tracing the edge of the compass. He hadn't even looked at it again yet. He wasn't sure he wanted to. Beau exhaled through his nose. Okay, so that was weird. Gideon didn't respond. He was still thinking about Harrowmere's warning. The first place it points won't be the real answer. Just a test. Was it a trick? Or did Harrowmere genuinely know something? And why did it feel like, hey? The voice was sudden, close. Both Gideon and Beau turned sharply. A man stood a few feet away. Not anyone special, just an average guy in standard casual market attire. Someone you wouldn't think twice about in a crowd. But he was staring at them like they'd just done something impossible. How did you do that? He asked. Beau blinked. Do what? The man glanced over his shoulder toward the alley they had just come from, then back at them. Make it disappear. Gideon's pulse skipped. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. I saw you go in there. I was across the plaza. I looked away for 1 second, and when I looked back, the shop was gone. Like it was never there. But you two, he gestured at them. You were still here. He swallowed hard, searching their faces. What did you do? A silence stretched between them. Gideon felt his grip tighten around the compass in his pocket. The free man let out a breath, glancing around as if checking to make sure no one else was paying attention. Then he took a step closer. Look, I don't know what's going on here, he said, in a voice lower now. But this isn't the first time I've seen something like this. Beau tensed slightly. Meaning? The guy hesitated again, then exhaled. Stores move, right? That's normal, but sometimes things don't just move. They vanish, and not just shops, people. Gideon and Beau exchanged a glance. The free man looked at them both, eyes with something uncertain, something between fear and curiosity. Tell me I'm not crazy. Gideon exhaled. You're not crazy. The man let out a breath, shoulders relaxing slightly. Good, he hesitated, then added, I'm Isaac Bowman. Beau looked him up and down, still skeptical. And how long have you been seeing things disappear, Isaac? Isaac scratched the back of his neck, eyes flicking between them like he was still deciding how much to say. A while. I don't know exactly when it started. You don't really notice it at first. You just wake up one day and realize something's missing. Isaac glanced over his shoulder toward the alley. But I've never seen a shop vanish like that before. 1 second it was there, and the next, he shook his head. It was like it had never existed. Beau exhaled sharply. Yeah, welcome to the club. Isaac looked at them carefully. So you've seen it too? Gideon hesitated. Not exactly. Isaac studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. But you know something. Maybe not everything, but something. Gideon didn't respond. Isaac let out another breath, rubbing his face. Look, I don't know what's going on, but I know what I saw. And I know I'm not supposed to be asking about it, but I also know that. He hesitated, lowering his voice. If things can disappear, so can people. Silence. Beau shifted uncomfortably. All right, man, maybe we should ping Gideon's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen, and showed it to Beau, who read out loud, "Be careful, they're listening."